Number 1. The Pantelleria Vecchia Bank Monolith. Picture yourself dropping through 40 meters of blue water in the Sicilian Channel, the stretch of sea between Sicily and Tunisia. The light fades. The seabed comes up pale and sandy, and lying there, broken cleanly into two pieces, is a single block of stone roughly 12 meters long and weighing somewhere near 12 tons. It is not a boulder. Its edges are too straight, and punched through one end is a hole. Perfectly round, bored all the way through. Someone made this. The problem is when. This is the Pantelleria Vecchia Bank, a former island that the sea swallowed long ago. It sits about 60 kilometers off the southwest coast of Sicily. The monolith was found during a high-resolution geophysical survey, and the results were published in 2015 by Emanuele Lodolo of Italy's National Institute of Oceanography and Experimental Geophysics in Trieste, working with Zvi Ben Avraham of Tel Aviv University. Their paper appeared in the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports, and their conclusion was direct. This object was cut, moved, and placed by human hands. Now here is where it stops being ordinary. Lodolo's team radiocarbon dated shell fragments encrusted on the rock and from nearby sediment cores. The numbers said the area was dry land until roughly 9,500 years ago, when rising seas drowned it at the end of the last ice age. That makes this worked stone about 9,500 years old. It predates Stonehenge by some 4,500 years. It predates the Egyptian pyramids by 5,000. When this pillar was raised, agriculture itself was barely beginning. During the last glacial maximum, when sea level sat about 120 meters lower than today, Pantelleria Vecchia was a small island. Mesolithic hunter-gatherers could have lived on it, fished from it, and apparently built on it. The stone is a kind of calcarenite, a cemented sandy rock, and that matters, because while such rock can fracture along fairly straight lines on its own, it does not drill its own holes. The three regular holes in the stone, especially the one drilled clean through, are what convinced the researchers. Natural rock does not do that. They suggested the monolith might have served as a primitive lighthouse, a mooring point, or a marker for a settlement and harbor now lost beneath the waves. So who were these people? The mainstream view is the most astonishing one, not the least. It says this is a genuine human monolith from an organized Mesolithic society, one capable of quarrying and moving multi-ton stone across an island thousands of years earlier than we gave them credit for. A more speculative fringe reads it as proof of a lost advanced civilization, an Atlantis before Atlantis. A handful of skeptics counter that natural fracturing can mimic straight edges. But the bored hole resists that easy answer. The stone still lies down there, untouched, too heavy and too fragile to raise, and it sets up the obvious question for everything that follows. If a real one can sit on the seafloor, how do you tell it from a fake? Number 2, the Azores underwater pyramid. In September of 2013, a Portuguese sailor named Diocleciano Silva was crossing the water between the islands of Terceira and São Miguel in the Azores when his depth sounder drew something strange on the screen. A shape rose from the seabed in clean geometric lines. He described it as a pyramid, about 60 meters tall, with a square base covering some 8,000 square meters, its top sitting roughly 40 meters below the surface. Most striking of all, he claimed it was aligned to the cardinal points, its faces squared to north, south, east, and west. That single detail is what turns a lump of rock into a legend. Alignment suggests intention. Intention suggests builders. And the Azores sit in a very suggestive place. This is a volcanic archipelago strung along the mid-Atlantic ridge, where the North American, Eurasian, and African plates pull apart. It also sits squarely in the middle of the Atlantic, exactly where Plato placed Atlantis, beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The story spread across the internet within days, and the word Atlantis was attached almost immediately. The Portuguese Hydrographic Institute investigated. Their verdict was far less romantic. They identified the feature as a natural volcanic formation, not a built structure. The region's intense volcanism readily produces steep angular seamounts and blocky lava edifices, and underwater volcanoes can even form flat tops called guyots, with sheer sides that look unnervingly architectural on a sonar display. No survey ever returned images of cut blocks, chambers, doorways, or tool marks. There was nothing to hold. The deeper lesson here is about the instrument itself. Sonar does not photograph the seabed. It paints a picture from returning sound, and that picture can exaggerate angles and flatten curves, producing geometric shapes that are artifacts of the scan rather than the rock. Marine scientists have a half-joking name for the effect. They call it sonar pareidolia, the same trick of the mind that finds faces in clouds, only here it finds pyramids in lava. Supporters tried to link the structure to other disputed megalith and rock art claims on the Azorean islands of Pico and São Miguel, but none of those have been confirmed either. So the Azores pyramid lives in a strange limbo. The mainstream calls it a misidentified seamount. Archaeology does not recognize it as a structure at all, and a devoted fringe still insists it is a tower of sunken Atlantis. The case is now taught as a cautionary tale, a reminder that one amateur sonar reading, however sincere, is the beginning of an investigation and not the end of one. Which makes the next site all the more unsettling. Because sometimes when you actually swim down and put your hand on the stone, the fake looks even more convincing than this. Number 3. The Zakynthos Lost City Columns. Off Alekinos Bay, on the Greek island of Zakynthos in the Ionian Sea, the water is shallow and clear, only 2 to 5 meters deep. Snorkelers drifting over the sand began reporting something that stopped them cold. Below them lay rows of circular column bases and flat paved disc shapes, arranged exactly like the courtyard floor of a sunken Greek public building. The conclusion seemed obvious. This was a lost harbor city, Hellenistic perhaps, drowned and waiting. It had columns, it had paving, it looked built. In 2016, a team led by Julian Andrews of the University of East Anglia, working with Greek authorities, decided to actually test it. They took samples and ran them through X-ray analysis, microscopy, scanning electron microscopy, and stable isotope chemistry. The answer overturned the headlines. The columns and pavements were not worked stone at all. They were natural mineral concretions, and the process that formed them is genuinely stranger than a lost city. Here's what happened. A fault beneath the seafloor let methane-rich fluid seep upward through the sediment. Microbes living in the sand fed on that methane, oxidizing it, and in doing so, they changed the chemistry of the water in the pore spaces around them. That change caused the mineral dolomite to precipitate, cementing loose sand into hard rock. Crucially, it cemented that rock around the vertical pipes where the gas was escaping. So you get donut rings and disc shapes and column-like masses formed around invisible plumbing. The shapes that looked like architecture were fossilized gas vents. The dating sealed it. These concretions formed in the Pliocene epoch up to about 5 million years ago. No Greek harbor is 5 million years old. 5 million. And the most damning evidence was what the team did not find. There was no pottery, no coins, no tools, no trace of the human debris that a real drowned settlement always leaves scattered behind. Professor Andrews summed it up by calling the site a very rare example of natural geological processes mimicking a man-made structure. Similar features turn up at cold methane seeps in the North Sea and the Gulf of Cadiz, so the Zakynthos Lost City was never a city. The mainstream calls it microbial dolomite. Archaeology formally debunked it, with the absence of artifacts as the deciding blow. And yet, predictably, it still circulates online as a real sunken metropolis because it simply looks too perfect to be an accident. That is the lesson the site teaches, and it is worth holding on to. Test the rock before you name the ruin. Because the eye is a liar and the seafloor is full of coincidences shaped exactly like our expectations. But not everything down there is a trick of geology. Some structures on the ocean floor are unmistakably, deliberately, ours. Number 4. The Conshelf, 2 underwater village. In the summer of 1963, a small group of men moved into a house on the bottom of the Red Sea and stayed there for a month. The house was real. It is still there. And if you dive the Sha'ab Rumi Reef, about 40 kilometers northeast of Port Sudan, you can swim right up to it. This was Continental Shelf Station 2, Conshelf 2, the brainchild of the French oceanographer Jacques-Yves Cousteau, and it remains one of the oldest deliberately built human structures still standing on a seafloor anywhere on Earth. The centerpiece was nicknamed the Starfish House, a 4-armed steel habitat resting on the reef at about 10 meters depth. 5 men, called oceanauts, lived inside it for a full month, breathing ordinary air at that pressure. A second, smaller structure called the Deep Cabin sat deeper at about 27.5 meters, where 2 divers lived, breathing a mixture of helium and oxygen. There was a submarine hangar, an onion-shaped garage for a small diving saucer, submersible, plus tool sheds and pens for fish. It was, in the most literal sense, a village on the ocean floor. This was Cousteau's second attempt at the idea. Conshelf 1, in 1962, had placed a single habitat off Marseille at 10 meters. The whole expedition was filmed, and the resulting documentary, World Without Sun, won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature in 1965. The goal was serious science wrapped in adventure. Cousteau wanted to prove that humans could live and work on the seabed for extended periods, the foundation of what we now call saturation diving, the technique that keeps divers at depth pressure for days at a time. When the experiment ended, the team removed most of the gear, but they left the major structures behind. The submarine hangar, the tool shed, the fish pen, and the anchoring points all stayed on the reef. More than 60 years later, they are still there. The hangar in particular is largely intact, thickly encrusted with coral, and diveable from the inside, where trapped pockets of air still shimmer against the ceiling. It has become a pilgrimage site for technical and historical divers, and Sudan protects it as marine heritage. Conshelf 2 did not just survive. It started something. It predated and directly influenced the United States Navy's SEAL-AB program, which began in 1964, and it shaped later analog habitats used to train for spaceflight. Cousteau himself went further still with Conshelf 3 in 1965, placing 6 men at 100 meters for 3 weeks. The mainstream remembers all this as a landmark of 1960s ocean engineering. To a diver who stumbles on it by accident, though, a rusting star-shaped house and a coral-choked submarine garage on the seabed feel like something out of a dream. And strange as it is, an even eerier set of structures waits just above the waterline. Number 5. The Maunsell Sea Forts. Out in the Thames estuary, where the river meets the open sea, clusters of rusting steel towers stand on tall legs driven into the seabed, linked by skeletal walkways, looking for all the world like the set of a post-apocalyptic film. These are the Maunsell Sea Forts, and they are 80 years old. They were designed by the civil engineer Guy Maunsell and deployed between 1942 and 1943 in the middle of the Second World War to defend Britain's estuaries against German aircraft and ships. There were 2 designs. The Royal Navy forts were the large towers built on concrete pontoon bases that were floated out and sunk onto sandbanks, where they settled into the seabed. The Army forts were stranger and more haunting. Each was a cluster of 7 separate steel towers, standing on stilt-like legs sunk into the estuary floor, and connected by gangways into a single fortress in the sea. The Thames groups carried names like Red Sands, Shivering Sands, and the Nore. They bristled with anti-aircraft weapons, 3.7-inch guns, and 40mm Bofors cannon, and were crewed by up to 265 personnel at a time. During the war, they earned their place. The forts are credited with shooting down around 22 aircraft and roughly 30 V-1 flying bombs aimed at London. When peace came, they fell quiet, and they were decommissioned in the mid-1950s. But their story did not end. In the 1960s, with the towers abandoned in international adjacent waters, pirate radio stations moved in, broadcasting pop music to Britain from platforms like Shivering Sands to dodge the country's strict broadcasting laws. Names like Radio Such and Radio City beamed out from the rusting steel. And then there's Sealand. In 1967, a former British major named Paddy Roy Bates occupied Reef's Tower, one of the Navy forts off the Suffolk coast, and declared it the Principality of Sealand, a self-proclaimed independent micronation with its own flag, currency, and passports. It has outlasted its founder and remains perhaps the most famous micronation in the world, all because a wartime gun platform was left standing on the seabed. The forts that survive have taken 80 years of tides, storms, and salt. Several are severely corroded now, structurally fragile, and access is restricted, though a preservation effort called Project Red Sands is trying to save the Red Sands group. Their legs remain embedded in the sediment, which makes them genuine seabed-anchored structures, not merely floating wrecks. The mainstream sees military heritage in a strange chapter of broadcasting and micronation history. Anyone who motors past them sees something the eye refuses to file as normal, steel fortresses rising from open water with no land in sight. But not every piece of metal resting on the ocean floor was ever meant to be in the sea at all. Number 6. The Apollo F-1 engines on the Atlantic floor. 4,300 meters down on the floor of the Atlantic, deeper than the wreck of the Titanic, the cold white beam of a robot's light once fell across a corroded rocket engine half buried in gray mud. That engine had launched men toward the moon. It is one of the strangest collisions of human frontiers imaginable, the technology of the space race lying silent in the crushing dark of the abyss. These are F-1 engines, the giant motors that powered the first stage of the Saturn V rocket. 5 of them clustered together at the base of every Saturn V, and each one produced about 1.5 million pounds of thrust, burning refined kerosene with liquid oxygen. About 165 seconds into each launch, that first stage shut down, separated, and fell back hundreds of kilometers downrange into the ocean. The engines that lifted Apollo 11 off the pad on July 16, 1969, sank to the Atlantic seabed and lay there for more than 40 years. In March of 2012, Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, announced that his privately funded expedition had located sunken F-1 engines using deep-sea sonar. The following March in 2013, the team went down with remotely operated vehicles and recovered components from 2 of them, lifting the twisted hardware to the deck of the recovery ship Seabed Worker. Bezos described what they found as a tangled mess of metal, deformed by the violent impact with the ocean surface decades earlier, and then 4 decades of corrosion in salt water. Identifying exactly which engines they were proved difficult, because the serial numbers were eaten away. But careful conservation work by the Kansas Cosmosphere eventually revealed a stamped number on one thrust chamber, confirming it as engine number 2044, an engine that had flown on Apollo 11 itself. NASA, which still legally owns the recovered government hardware, allowed the artifacts to be conserved and displayed, and some now sit in the Museum of Flight in Seattle, where the public can stand beside metal that has been to the edge of space and to the bottom of the sea. The recovery was a genuine feat of deep-sea salvage carried out at full abyssal plane depth in lightless, near-freezing, immensely high-pressure water. It also showed that private robotics had matured to the point of recovering heritage hardware from places that a generation earlier only navies could reach. The mainstream story holds no real mystery about origin, but the image refuses to leave you. A rocket bell designed to roar against the sky, resting instead in the eternal night of the deep ocean. Many more spent stages and engines from Apollo and other launches still lie scattered across the Atlantic floor, unrecovered and unmarked. And the oldest argument about seafloor structures older than the space program is still unsettled to this day. Number 7. The Bimini Road. In 1968, divers off the island of North Bimini in the Bahamas found a line of large, mostly rectangular limestone blocks lying under about 5.5 meters of clear water. The blocks stretched in a J-shaped run roughly 0.8 of a kilometer long, half a mile, looking exactly like a paved road or a fallen wall sinking into the sand. One of the discoverers was the zoologist and archaeologist J. Manson Valentine, and the find was given an irresistible name: the Bimini Road. What turned this from a curiosity into a global sensation was timing. 30 years earlier, in 1938, the American psychic Edgar Cayce had prophesied that evidence of Atlantis would rise near Bimini in, as he put it, 68 or 69. When divers found the blocks in exactly 1968, the prophecy seemed to have come true. The Bimini Road became the single most famous piece of supposed Atlantis evidence on Earth, and it has anchored the debate over underwater structures ever since. The geologists arrived next. Eugene Shin of the United States Geological Survey studied the blocks closely and identified them as a natural material called beach rock. Beach rock forms when carbonate sand along a shoreline is cemented into solid rock, and as it weathers, it cracks along regular joints into blocky, often rectangular shapes. Shin drilled cores through the blocks and found that they all dip consistently in the same direction, matching the slope of a single underlying rock sheet, with internal layering that runs straight through, exactly what you would expect from one continuous natural slab, and not from separately quarried stones stacked by hand. Radiocarbon dates place the rock at roughly 2,000 to 4,000 years old, ordinary for natural Holocene shoreline rock. The believers did not concede. They pointed to blocks that appear to sit in two tiers, to smaller stones that look like props wedged underneath larger ones, and to surfaces they argue show tool marks. The counter-argument is that natural beach rock also produces tiers when slabs slump, and props when undercutting erosion leave stones balanced on others. And the decisive gap remains the same one we saw at Zakynthos. In more than 50 years, no pottery, no metal, no diagnostic human artifact has ever been recovered from the Bimini Road. So the mainstream geological verdict is settled. It is fractured beach rock, not a highway. Archaeology rejects it as a built structure. The fringe holds to Atlantis and to Casey's eerily accurate date. The Bimini Road endures as the purest example of this video's central tension, the moment where natural geometry and human longing meet, and the eye chooses to see a road. But while the Bimini debate runs on, modern builders have started doing something bolder. They are constructing fake sunken cities on the seafloor on purpose. Number 8. The Neptune Memorial Reef. About 5 kilometers off Key Biscayne, near Miami, in roughly 12 meters of water, there is a sunken city. Columns rise from the seabed. Archways frame empty avenues. Bronze lions stand guard at a great gateway, slowly greening with coral. A diver who came upon it without warning could be forgiven for thinking they had found a lost civilization. They have not. They have found the Neptune Memorial Reef, and it was built in our own century in 2007. It was conceived by Gary Levine and designed by the artist Kim Brendel, and it was originally announced under the name the Atlantis Memorial Reef, which tells you exactly what aesthetic they were chasing. It is, in plain terms, an underwater cemetery, the largest man-made reef in the world. The remains of the deceased are cremated, mixed with cement, and shaped into the columns, benches, gateways, and pathways that make up the city. Loved ones can be quite literally built into the structure of a growing artificial reef. The scale of the plan is enormous. The reef was designed to eventually spread across more than 6 hectares, about 16 acres of seabed, and to hold the remains of more than 100,000 people. Everything is engineered from reinforced concrete to survive hurricanes and powerful currents, anchored to stable foundations on what was previously a barren, sandy bottom. Each feature can carry personalized plaques, and the whole site is permitted and regulated by environmental authorities because it is not only a monument. It is deliberately functional habitat. That is the part that matters ecologically. By placing this elaborate structure on an empty patch of seafloor, the project created a brand new reef. Fish, corals, sponges, and other marine life have moved in and colonized the columns and lions, and marine biologists monitor that slow greening over the years. It belongs to a growing movement of green burial and memorial reefs, the idea that human commemoration can give something back to the ocean rather than taking from it. The Bruntsed lions in the Great Central Gateway are the most photographed features, and divers report that the place feels less like a graveyard than like the courtyard of some patient, half-built Atlantis. The mainstream account here is fully documented with no mystery whatsoever about who built it or why. And yet, the Neptune Memorial Reef belongs on this list precisely because of how it reads to an unprepared eye. We spent the first half of this video watching nature counterfeit architecture at Zakynthos, at Bimini, in the Azores. Here, humans have reversed the trick, deliberately building a counterfeit ancient city and sinking it on purpose, complete with the columns and lions that say antiquity to the human brain. It raises a genuinely unsettling thought. Centuries from now, explorers might find our memorial reefs and our sculpture parks and read them as the ruins of a lost world, exactly as we once misread mineral concretions, because we are not only sinking fake cities, we are sinking people. Number 9. The Cancún Underwater Museum. Off the coast of Cancún and Isla Mujeres, in the warm Caribbean water of Mexico, more than 500 human figures stand on the seafloor in silent ranks, faces blank, bodies slowly disappearing under a creeping skin of coral. The first time divers descend into them, the reaction is almost always the same, an instinctive jolt of unease before the mind catches up. This is the Museo Subacuático de Arte, the underwater museum of art known as MUSA, and it was founded in 2009. The museum was started by Jaime Gonzalez Cano of the local marine park, together with collaborators, and most of its sculptures are the work of the British artist Jason de Cuyers Taylor. Its most famous installation is called The Silent Evolution, a crowd of about 450 life-size human figures standing together on the seabed at depths of roughly 4 to 8 meters. The figures were cast from molds of real local residents, which is exactly why they unsettle people so deeply. These are not generic statues. Each has the features of a specific living person, frozen and submerged and staring into the blue. There is a serious purpose beneath the eeriness. The sculptures are made from a special pH-neutral marine concrete, formulated to encourage coral larvae and other organisms to settle and grow on them. Over the years, the human forms become living reefs, gradually softened and consumed by the very life they were designed to attract. The whole installation weighs over 200 tons of concrete, and it was conceived as both art and conservation, a way to pull tourists and divers away from fragile natural reefs by giving them a new, artificial reef to explore instead. It worked. Musa became one of the most visited underwater attractions in the world, and its success launched a whole genre. Jason de Cuyers Taylor went on to build similar underwater sculpture parks in Grenada, in Lanzarote in the Canary Islands, and in the Maldives, each one a new field of figures, seeding new habitat. The mainstream account, again, is completely clear. This is a deliberate 21st century art and conservation project fully documented from the first casting. But stand among those figures, and the deeper theme of this entire video crystallizes. The shock you feel at hundreds of human bodies on the seabed is the same shock. Inverted, that makes people see lost cities in lava and concretions. Our brains are wired to read the human and the built into the deep, whether it belongs there or not. And because the coral keeps advancing, Musea is literally a different artwork every single year, dissolving slowly into reef. We are seeding the ocean floor with our own future anomalies, structures that future explorers will have to puzzle over. Yet, the oldest deliberate human structure on this whole list does not stand in one place at all. It stretches across an entire ocean. Number 10. The first transatlantic telegraph cable. Long before the internet, before satellites, before anyone had mapped the deep ocean at all, human beings laid a single thread of iron and copper across the entire floor of the North Atlantic. It runs from Valentia Island off the southwest coast of Ireland to Heart's Content in Newfoundland, a distance of more than 3,200 kilometers across abyssal plains and over the mid-Atlantic ridge in places deeper than 4,000 meters. It was the first structure ever to span an entire ocean floor, and almost no one pictures it lying down there in the dark. The project was driven by the American businessman Cyrus Westfield and the Atlantic Telegraph Company, founded in 1856. Its chief scientific advisor was the physicist William Thomson, later Lord Kelvin, who designed the extraordinarily sensitive instruments needed to detect a whisper of current after it had traveled thousands of kilometers through the sea. The cable itself was a marvel of materials, a copper core to carry the signal, wrapped in gutta percha, a natural latex from Malaysian trees that happens to resist seawater beautifully, all armored in a sheath of iron wire. It did not come easily. The cable broke and failed in 1857, and then twice more in 1858 before a working line was finally completed on August 5th, 1858. 11 days later, on August 16th, the first official transatlantic telegraph message passed between Queen Victoria and the United States President James Buchanan. The Queen's message of about 98 words took roughly 16 hours to crawl across the ocean. The signal was so faint and the cable so imperfect, and the triumph was brief. After only about 3 weeks, the cable died, partly because an engineer named Wildman Whitehouse had pushed up to 2,000 volts through it in a desperate attempt to strengthen the signal, destroying the insulation. The lasting cable came in 1866, laid by the Great Eastern, the largest ship in the world at the time, and the only vessel that could carry the entire length of cable in its holds at once. On that voyage, the crew not only completed a fresh cable, but also grappled the broken 1865 lineup from the deep, thousands of meters down, spliced it, and brought it back to life. Almost overnight, a message that had taken 10 days to cross the Atlantic by ship could be sent in minutes. Those Victorian cables still lie on the seabed, obsolete now and silent, the ancestors of an invisible empire. Today, roughly 1.4 million kilometers of submarine cable carry something like 99% of all data that moves between the continents, the true backbone of the global internet. Almost all of it out of sight on the ocean floor. The achievement is commemorated at Valentia Island, a candidate for a World Heritage status, and at the old cable station at Hearts Content, and it reframes this entire countdown. We tend to think of seafloor structures as anomalies, rare and accidental. But humanity has been deliberately building across the deep for more than 165 years, which leaves one obvious question. Why does the ocean hide all of this so completely? The answer begins with the sheer scale of the dark. Even now in the mid-2020s, only about a quarter of the seafloor has been mapped in high resolution. The average depth of the ocean is around 3,700 meters, and most of that is a lightless abyssal plain that no human eye has ever seen directly. Sunlight vanishes below about 1,000 meters. The pressure at the greatest depths reaches more than 1,000 atmospheres, enough to crush a steel sphere. And those same brutal conditions, the cold, the dark, the low oxygen, are exactly what preserve structures for thousands of years. Decay slows almost to a stop. Sediment drifts down and buries things gently. Coral encrusts a sunken house or a row of statues, and, in hiding them, protects them. Add to that the sea level rise of about 120 meters since the last ice age, which drowned entire coastlines and the settlements on them, and you have a planet whose largest archive is also its least examined. The ocean keeps its secrets because we have barely begun to look. And into that darkness, our own minds rush to fill the gaps with architecture. The most consistent pattern across these 10 structures is not in the water at all. It is in us. The human brain is exquisitely tuned to notice straight lines, right angles, and symmetry, the signatures of intention, and the seafloor produces all three by accident. Beach rock fractures into clean rectangles as at Bimini. Methane seeps cement sediment into columns and disks as at Zakynthos. Volcanic ridges throw up steep pyramid-like faces as in the Azores. Low-resolution sonar then sharpens every one of those edges, manufacturing geometry that the rock only hinted at. Layer on top of that the cultural gravity of Atlantis, from Plato to Edgar Cayce, and confirmation bias does the rest. We see what we are primed to see. The single test that cuts through all of it is stubbornly simple. Look for the artifacts. A real drowned settlement leaves pottery, tools, and metal. A natural formation leaves only rock. Pavlopetri and Heraklion, genuine sunken sites, are full of human debris. Zakynthos had none, and that absence was the verdict. So how do investigators tell the difference for certain? They bring a whole toolkit to bear. Multi-beam sonar maps the shape of the seabed in broad swaths, while side-scan sonar images texture and individual objects, and sub-bottom profilers peer into the buried layers below. Remotely operated vehicles fly down with high-definition cameras and sampling arms, autonomous robots survey vast areas alone, and crude submersibles let scientists put a human eye on the rock directly. Sediment cores recover datable material, radiocarbon dating fixes the age of submergence, and the same stable isotope and electron microscopy methods that unmasked Zakynthos can trace a mineral back to its true origin. Photogrammetry stitches thousands of images into precise three-dimensional models. For modern artifacts, there are serial numbers and provenance records, the very things that confirmed Apollo engine number 2044. None of these tools works alone. It takes geologists, archaeologists, and engineers together to turn a sensational headline into an established fact, and that method is the only real defense against the lying eye. Increasingly, though, the question is changing because more and more, we are the builders. Beneath the deliberate fakes and the genuine ruins lies a quiet truth. The seabed has become a construction frontier. That 1.4 million kilometers of cable is only the beginning. Memorial reefs fold human remains into living habitat. Underwater sculpture parks rise off Cancún, Grenada, Lanzarote, and the Maldives. Research habitats carry on the Conshelf legacy, like the Aquarius base off Florida. Offshore wind foundations, oil and gas platforms, pipelines, sunken ships turned into artificial reefs, and now the first infrastructure for seabed mining and carbon storage are all settling onto the ocean floor. Each one adds a layer to the record that future explorers will sift, and the line between heritage and litter grows blurry, somewhere between a Cousteau habitat and the wreck of a lost submersible. Which brings us back to the question stamped on every structure in this video. Who built it? Every one of these 10 sites sits right at the edge of belief. Some are genuinely ancient, like the Pantelleria Monolith, raised when farming was new. Some are natural illusions, like Zakynthos and Bimini, where the planet only mimicked our hands. And some are deliberate and modern, the habitats, the reefs, the statue fields, the cables. The thread that ties them together is that the seafloor records human ambition and human accident with the same patient indifference. As the seas keep rising this century, more coastlines and more cities will join them down there, and our cables and reefs and wrecks will become tomorrow's archaeology, waiting to be misread exactly as we misread the gas vents off a Greek island. The ocean preserves what the land erases. 3/4 of its floor is still unmapped in any detail, and every new survey carries the power to rewrite the story. The honest answer to who built it is almost always the same. Test it and see. Curiosity paired with method is the only reliable guide we have, and the deep remains what it has always been. The planet's last great unexamined museum, still waiting for the rest of us to ask the right questions.